Real people, real radio.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
All I'm offering is the truth.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba. And tonight we're going to be talking with Josh Peck. Josh Peck is a Christian author and biblical researcher. He works toward waking up the church to the reality of the Bible, separating biblical truth from church tradition when necessary, and providing the solid, raw, and uncut truth of God's Word to any and all who are interested. He is the founder of Mini Study Ministry, the goal of which is to provide short, personal, and inexpensive study materials for the average at-home Bible reader, study group, and church. Josh Peck also hosts a weekly audio and video internet show entitled The Sharpening, which features regular guests and Bible study covering a wide range of topics. Now, I've been on his show before, and he's actually been on the Revolutionary Radio Project before, too, but this is his first time with us here on Truth Frequency Radio, so it is my honor to welcome back to the Revolutionary Radio Project, Josh Peck. Josh, are you there?
Yes, I am. How you doing?
Good, man. Long time no talk to.
Yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, well, I'm new to the Truth Frequency Radio Network, and I believe this is your first time here as well. So for the sake of this listening audience, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first, I want to say thank you for bringing me on, and I'm very glad to be here for the first time on this network. That's really cool, and congratulations. But a little bit about myself. I was born and raised Baptist, so it was very, very traditional mindset. And after a while, I've always been curious by nature. That doesn't always mesh well with a traditional Baptist mindset.
Yeah, right. Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Keep your mouth shut and take everything on faith, and that was about the only answer I'd get. So I had a lot of questions, and even as a child and everything. And after a while, I kind of fell away from the church as a teenager. I never fell away from God necessarily, but I definitely fell out of the whole church thing, and stopped reading the Bible and stuff like that, and started doing my own thing. And I got involved in New Age theology because I thought at the time that it provided better or more complete answers to the questions that I had, and that because growing up in that type of environment, I thought that I knew everything that there is to know in the Bible. I didn't just sit there and arrogantly, think that, well, I know everything. But I had grown up in the church, and so I figured, well, anything that's important that's in there, I must have already been taught. So because in the church they kept repeating kind of the same things over and over again. So I figured the rest of the stuff in the Bible just wasn't necessarily important, or I didn't think there was any real answers in there. So I went to New Age theology to try to get some answers there, and for a while it was all right, and I kind of bought into it, and but it just through a series of I guess, supernatural events and occurrences, I sort of realized that was not the way to go. And actually, to be honest, it almost ruined my life. So coming out of that, I started to discover that there are actually things in the Bible that I wasn't aware of. And there are answers in the Bible in areas that the church doesn't usually discuss. Like in Old Testament things, especially, or like prophetic things, stuff like that, that at least in the church that I grew up in, they never really got much into. So in discovering that, what really opened my eyes to and really reignited my passion for the Bible was Genesis 6, when that was first brought to my attention. And when I discovered that was like a life-changing event. After that, my wife and I we got back into the Bible to see, well, Genesis 6 explains at least one question that I had, namely about aliens, that kind of explains that. So what else is in there? And we got really excited about the Bible and started to really look at like prophecy. And what I realized that what really did it for me was when I realized the accuracy of the prophecies within the Bible that have already been fulfilled, and there's a lot of them. And the general consensus is usually, well, the prophecies in the Bible are vague, and to be fair, a few of them are, but there's a lot of them that are really specific that there's no way they could be self-fulfilled, especially concerning Jesus and all that, and even outside of that, just historical things as well. But so that really, for me, added a lot of legitimacy to the Bible, whereas New Age theology didn't have that. There was no sort of proof text. I look at fulfilled prophecy in the Bible and say, okay, that's the proof that this is real and this is the Word of God, because it's accurate. Who else is going to be able to tell the future like that? I think in New Age theology they said that Edgar Cayce was one of the most accurate at 80%. Rough estimation, 80% accuracy. Well, that's pretty good, but how about 100% accuracy? And that's what I found in the Bible. So we got super excited about it and started diving into the Bible on our own, and started looking at it instead of through the lens of the tradition, the traditional lens that I was brought up with. I just started looking at it as the plain text that it was, and started to see that a lot of the stuff that I grew up with wasn't exactly biblical. A lot of it was added on. Like weird things, like you can't wear jeans on weekdays, or just weird stuff, or you
listen
gotta
to rock music.
Yeah, you can't listen to rock music, or you got to have your hair cut a certain length above your ears, like weird, just like it's not even in the Bible. Like,
did you go to my church and we just didn't see each other? What's
I think so. We've had this discussion before. And unfortunately, there are a lot of churches like that, and I think that a lot of that legalism really is what turns people off to Christianity, at least in my experience of trying to witness to people and, tell people about God. A lot of times the reason, if they're familiar with Christianity at all, the reason that they don't want any part of it is because of stuff like that. They will see that and believe that it represents Christianity, and I can't really blame them for that. I mean, if I wasn't a Christian and somebody came up to me and was acting like that, real judgmental, and said that I have to cut my hair and not wear jeans ever, or whatever. If I thought that those were the kinds of things, like, I wouldn't want any part of a religion like that. Who would? And so I started to, but all of that stuff, it's just all of those things are traditions that man has added to the Bible. It's not the way that they support it is they cherry pick verses. They'll take a verse here and then base a whole doctrine on it without considering the context that the verse was actually written in to begin with. Mm-hmm. So once I started seeing that, it really opened up the Bible like I was reading it for the first time, and I was blown away by how amazing this book is, and just how accurately it represented God, and how the God of the Bible, this isn't exactly the God that I was taught about in church. It was to an extent, but a lot of it wasn't. And so I just fell in love with it, and started studying it more and more, me and my wife, and it got me all excited, and I started praying a lot more. I rededicated my life to Jesus. I was saved beforehand, but I wasn't really, I wasn't living for him or anything. Like I wasn't. If I had a choice to make, I would just choose whatever best suited me and not even think about God. So I stopped doing that, and I prayed and sort of, I don't know, got resaved, or I rededicated my life to God, and ever since then I realized what it means to have a real personal relationship with him, which that was always kind of an abstract thought growing up. Like it was like, well, the relationship you have with God is, you read the New Testament and you go to church, and that's it. It's so much more than that. So so I started to instead of thinking of God as kind of just this abstract thing that we can't really know, or I started realizing he's a real person with real feelings and emotions, and he actually wants to be my father, and wants me to be wants to be in my life and all this stuff, and that got me really excited. So I started, after coming into this type of realization, I started to really pray and say, well, this can't just be for me. There has to be a bigger reason that this was all revealed, because it was so fast too. Like, I mean, it was pretty much one day I was one way, and then like the next day after, seeing some of this stuff, it was like an instant change. And so I prayed a lot about it, and I felt like God wanted me to start writing. So I wrote my first book, Disclosure, and that kind of was my introduction into what is sometimes referred to as the fringe Christian community that I consider myself very much a part of. And what I love about it is it's not a church or a set of doctrines, or it's not anything like that. It's just the Bible is what it is. It's God's word. You take it for what it is, and we realize, or we're supposed to, there's always some out there that don't, but we realize we don't have all the answers. And what I loved about that community, especially, is that for the most part they're open to different interpretations of things while still maintaining the doctrinal stuff like salvation and things like that. So so I got involved with that. I met some really, got to know some really nice people, you being one of the first. Because when I was first going through this change, I saw some stuff from L.A. Marzulli, and then through that I found some of your stuff, and you were one of the first people that I contacted, and we've been in contact ever since then. So that's always been that's always been really, really kind of cool for me. But and that basically leads me to where I am today. I'm still learning. That was a year or two ago now. So I've learned a lot since then. I just released an updated and expanded version of Disclosure, and that was my first book. But my latest book, though, is Quantum Creation, which is what we're going to talk about today. But so in a lot of ways, I kind of have you to thank for that. God's used you in my life to make that transition, you and other people as well. But that basically, that's the long and short of it, I guess.
Very cool, man. You mentioned a few things I want to touch on before we get into your new book. For the sake of the listeners who may not be familiar with Genesis 6, what was it specifically about? What is Genesis 6 about, and what was it about it that really caught your attention?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the biggest question I had, and I don't know, the only thing that I can say now is that I really think that God put this question in my heart as a child for use later, because I had this burning question, and it really bothered me. Do aliens exist, and if so, where are they in the Bible, and if not, where does it say that in the Bible? And I could never get a straight answer out of anybody, in the church. The only answer I really got was, well, they're demons. And then when I tried to ask for more information, it was just, well, Josh, you just got to take it on faith. Like, that was the go-to answer for everything. You just got to take it on faith. I'm like, well, that doesn't really help. I mean, okay, but that doesn't really, to me, it just seemed like they were sidestepping the issue instead of just saying, well, I really don't know, Josh. I would have rather have heard that, because at least that's, more honest. And so I had this burning question about aliens, and I always wanted to know. And then especially when I started dating my wife now, and when her and I started talking about those things, 'cause that was something that she had often wondered as well, because she actually had seen UFOs, and that's something that I actually had her on my show to talk about. She kind of came out and talked about her experiences with that, which that was really awesome that she did that. That was a cool show. But so we talked about that, and while we were dating, and even after once we got married, that was something that we always wondered, and neither of us really knew that there was an answer in the Bible about it, until one day I just happened to turn on the TV, and this show called It's Supernatural. And I know that show's kind of controversial, so I'm not endorsing it, or I'm not saying don't watch, I'm not, whatever, to each his own. But that show just happened to come on. It's Supernatural with Sid Roth. And L.A. Marzulli was on there, and he was talking about the Mark of the Beast, which was something I remember as a child reading through Revelation. That was something that was always interesting to me, was the Mark of the Beast. And L.A. Marzulli was making the connection between the Mark of the Beast and these alien implants that abductees have been getting. And he's got a lot of great research on that. But so it led from there to the from the Mark of the Beast, the alien implant thing, and then they started talking about Genesis 6, which talks about how before the flood, at some point a group of angels fell from heaven, rebelled against God, and actually procreated with mankind. And that, I had read Genesis as a child, and I've always just glossed over that. I never really thought much about it. But once it was presented to me in that way, I thought, how did I miss that? Like, how that is something that's so strange and like so weird and so like such a big deal. I mean, angels had sex with humans and like birthed giants. Like, how is that not? That's like one of the most interesting stories in all the Bible. How is that not taught in church? And so when it was presented to me in that fashion, LA was saying, well, if we look at the Genesis 6 account and then look at modern day abduction accounts, they really do line up. It's like the same story, just different packaging. And, it was a pretty short show. It was only maybe 20 or 30 minutes. Well, probably 20 minutes because there's commercials and stuff too. So I didn't get a whole lot of information, but it was enough that it really sparked my interest to dig into the Bible on my own and to some other researchers. So Genesis 6, it talks about the fallen angels who fell from heaven, rebelled against God, because that was another big thing too, was that angels actually do have a physical form, which I didn't know, but the Bible actually does say that. Our culture portrays angels as being more like ethereal or kind of like wisps of nothing, but when the Bible talks about an angel, it's most of the time it has descriptions about him being like solid and actually like even eating food and stuff like that. So that was absolutely fascinating to me, and so that's how they were able to procreate. And so I went through all the verses on them. I mean, I wrote a lot about that in Disclosure, because that was the main thing that opened the door for me. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what Genesis 6 is all about. It's about the fallen angels that rebelled against God. They came down to earth. They procreated with mankind and gave birth to these giants, or in the Hebrew, Nephilim. So when people talk about Nephilim, that's what they're talking about. These offspring of the fallen angels and humans, and it created all sorts of havoc on the earth. They're very, very evil, very evil creatures. So I mean, we could easily do a whole show about that, but in a nutshell, that's what Genesis 6 is all about.
Yeah, I had heard a statement, because I grew up in a very similar environment to what you described, very legalistic, and as a result, it led to a belief, sort of a good cop, bad cop view of God and Jesus. It's like Jesus was cool. He was, the friendly guy that, he hung out with publicans and sinners, and he didn't judge people, and he healed everybody and cast out demons and fought with the religious people. And, he was like cool. Mm-hmm. And yet he would tell Philip, hey, Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. And he would say, I and my Father are one. And he'd make all these comments about how he and his Father are the same. And that just never computed in my head, because I looked at the Old Testament, and it's like, here's the New Testament, Jesus loving everybody. In the Old Testament, God's like, kill the women, kill the children, wipe out the animals, kill everything. Ah! He's like this genocidal maniac,
Yeah.
And it just didn't compute. And, as a result, I didn't spend much time in the Old Testament. It just tweaked me out. I mean, we had our usual, token stories that we'd pull out of it, for whatever. But as a whole, I didn't spend much time in it, because just I couldn't reconcile these things. And then I heard Steve Quayle make a comment that I will never forget. He said basically that, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said that the understanding of Genesis 6 is the Rosetta Stone for unlocking history and the Scriptures. Like, yeah. Everything falls into place, all the pieces fit, everything starts making sense, and you see, well, I mean, when there's conquest of land, naturally there's warfare, but there were, humane rules of war. I mean, if you're fighting with a guy and you kill him, okay, you kill the guy, but you could take the women and children and the animals and whatnot as spoils of war. But then you'd see those other cities where you would say, but when you go over here, you got to kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, kill everybody. And it wasn't until I got into Genesis 6 and really started to understand what was going on there, and then subsequently what happens in Genesis 10 with the Table of Nations, and specifically 10:6 through 21, where it lists all the ites. Those were the ites that God was saying, utterly destroy, kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, kill everything. And all of a sudden, everything just started making sense to me, and I'm like, okay, now I get it. Now, I mean, it just freed me up to just really dive in and explore new ground, new territory all throughout the Old Testament. And it became a fascinating book for one thing, but beyond that, it really reconciled my relationship with the Father.
Yeah, and it was really similar with me too, because I had always wondered that as a child as well, like how can a loving God, want to murder all these people? But really, it's in those lineages. They weren't human. They were Nephilim. They were things that weren't even supposed to be created, and they hated God anyway. Yeah. They didn't want anything to do with him. They absolutely rebelled against God. They hate. There was no chance for redemption. They didn't want it anyway. And all those cities. And all those tribes and everything, all those ites in the lineages, they were every single one of them. They were Nephilim tribes, and that's why God said kill them all, and even the children, because they weren't even human, and even the animals were corrupted. It says all flesh was corrupted. So I mean, they even did, I don't know what, but they they did something to the animals where they weren't even they weren't even good. I used to look at it, and a lot of people I think too look at it as the Old Testament God is a is kind of a monster. But the way that I look at it now, the God of the Old Testament, he's the one that chased away the monsters.
Oh, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true though, because that's what the atheist, the agnostic, just people who don't want to have anything to do with God, they will point to all those scriptures and say, I don't want to serve a God like that. Well, you know what? Neither do I.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I don't either. But thankfully, now I understand it, and it becomes a much different picture. I like that. I like what you just said. He's not a monster. He's chasing away the monsters.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such I wrote a mini study book, which is basically just like a really short. My mini study books are like short 50-page studies, like they're meant to be read in like an hour. But I wrote one called "What Loving God Really Means," and I showed in there that all the things that a lot of people will point to and say, see, there's God, he's hateful, he's mean. They're actually extreme showcases of love. And when we look at it from the right context, and I don't necessarily blame like atheists and agnostics for feeling that way. If anybody, I blame the church for not ever talking about it, because this is stuff that really needs to be talked about in the church. I mean, it's when we look at it for what it is, it's an expression of God's love. His love for his children, for humanity, that he actually empowered those people to be able to kill the giants and so the people themselves wouldn't be destroyed. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even the whole flood thing, because a lot of maybe non-believers or whoever will say, well, he destroyed the whole world. Like how could that possibly be an act of love? I think that was one of the greatest acts of love that God's ever shown, because he took the last remaining people on Earth. There were only 8 of them, last remaining humans on Earth, and saved them from a world filled with monsters. Instead of God could have just destroyed the whole thing and started over from scratch if he wanted to, but that's not in his nature.
Hold that thought. We're going to go to break. We'll come
absolutely
back and we'll address that.
Yep.
This is London calling on Longwave.
The Chris Everard Show.
Sundays on Truth Frequency Radio.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight we're talking with Josh Peck. And before the break, we were talking about the God of the Old Testament and various misconceptions regarding how people view him. But you made a statement right before the break about how the flood of Noah was actually the ultimate act of love. Care to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we read the account, we find out that only Noah and his sons, and apparently possibly his wives, but the wives of the son, that's a whole other thing. But 8 people at least had made their the whole world had made their choice. That's the awesome thing about God, is that we have free will. We can choose whether we want to follow him or not, and God waited until everybody had made that choice in the world, and there were only 8 people that chose to side with God. The rest of them were either Nephilim themselves, or they had chosen to be, affiliate with them, or, I don't know if the entire world was Nephilim exactly, but it could have been. At the very least, they were all like just completely evil. I mean, they wanted nothing to do with God, so they were, it was a very, very dangerous world to live in for the only 8 remaining people that chose to stick with God. So, what God did was he decided, well, okay, everybody's made their choice. Let's take these 8 people and have them. Let's save them from the world of monsters, basically. Because again, these weren't these weren't like human beings or people. These were abominations. Yeah, they were Nephilim. These things that weren't supposed to be created in the first place. They were like manifestations of the enemy. You know, they were just bad, all around bad dudes. So the ultimate act of love was that he waited long enough for everybody to make their choice, and you know they did. He took the last remaining people that actually still loved God, and you know he took them, saved them from an entire world full of monsters, and gave them you know after the flood and everything, gave them a brand new life basically. So I mean, when I look at that now with the proper understanding of what Genesis 6 was all about, I look at that as a great expression of God's love. It's not you know it's not that God was just being, you know, like this crazy maniac or anything like that. And you know there are a lot of stories in the Old Testament that are like that, like we touched on before with the killing of all those tribes and everything. They weren't human. They were these abominations. So I see it now as a great act of love on part of the Creator.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, most people are taught about the flood that it's just because, you know, people were bonking each other over the head with clubs and, you know, they were, you know, all alcoholics or homosexuals or whatever, you know, they're killing each other and stuff. And that's usually what we hear. And so God decided to kill everybody. Right. But you skip over, I mean, it actually tells you the cause of the flood is in Genesis 6:12, where it says all flesh had become corrupted.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I refer to some of these other books like Enoch and Joshua and Jubilees. They're not in our Bible today, although Enoch has been in and out of the Bible. I refer to them as the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra-biblical texts because the Bible quotes from them and talks about them, and it mentions them by name.
Yeah.
And those books go into a whole lot more detail, especially the book of Enoch, telling you about what the angels did and what they taught men to do and how they were blending themselves with animals and lizards and just, you know, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was a crazy, just psychotic environment. And you know, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's like God basically just said, you know, if I don't do something about this, none of my creation is going to make it. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, then it becomes a tremendous act of love, as you said. I mean, he's saving us from the monsters. But speaking of monsters, you made another comment earlier in the first segment where you took a little journey into the New Age movement and whatnot. You said you had experienced some supernatural events. Are we talking like paranormal experiences or people type stuff or what?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had sleep paralysis ever since before I can remember, and basically there's the medical definition, which sleep paralysis is basically you have 3 chemicals in your brain that go off when you sleep. One of them makes you unconscious. One of them, the next one that's supposed to fire off is the one that is supposed to kind of paralyze you so you don't act out your dreams. You know, like sleepwalkers have a problem with that one. And then the third one it actually makes you dream. So I ever since I can remember, I've had this thing called sleep paralysis where from the medical standpoint, they don't fire off in the right order, meaning there were times that I would wake up and be totally, completely awake, yet paralyzed, not able to move, yet I would be seeing stuff. Now, like doctors will say that you're just dreaming, you know, the hallucinations are just dreams. But I always wondered why are they always nightmares? Because when I was a kid, I didn't really have any bad dreams or anything, but every single time I had sleep paralysis, it was never anything good. So I always had that problem, and then you know that was something that I brought up too with the church, and they said, well, you know, it's probably just demons, you know, you're being attacked by demons, but there really wasn't any more information besides that. So I'm like, okay, well, what do I do about it? And they're like, well, just pray. So I did that, you know, and that, you know, it kind of worked, but it didn't like stop it in its tracks or anything like that. And so for a while, for a while, I tried to latch on to the medical explanation, and I really tried to think that was all that was going on. But it wasn't adding up, because when I was doing that, when I was trying to adhere to the medical side of it, I was starting to have manifestations of what people will call shadow people. Mm-hmm. I was starting to see these shadow people, but they would interact with the environment, with my bedroom. They would move stuff or something, and that thing would still be moved when I woke up. That a dream's not going to be able to do that. For example, one of the earliest I can remember, I was in bed, and all of a sudden I couldn't move, and I knew I was completely awake. Like, there wasn't any kind of like lucid dreaming or anything like that. Like, it was no doubt I was absolutely awake. And I had always kept my bedroom door closed during that time, because we had cats and they would come in and wake me up. So I always had my door closed at night. Well, I heard this sound coming from the other end of the door, from the hallway, and this kind of shuffling noise. And then I saw my doorknob start to turn. So I'm laying there, and I can't move, and I'm freaking out, wondering what's going on. And at first I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just my mom or something like that. And I was probably maybe 12 or 13 years old at this time. And the door opens, and this hooded figure walks in, and he was standing over me, and one of the creepiest things, and it sounds like a simple thing, but it's really creepy when it happens, is when he leaned over me. Like, that's not creepy enough. He for support, he put his hand on the bed, and I could actually feel the bed like dip down where he was pushing his weight on to be able to lean over me more. And that was when it was like, okay, this is real. This is not a dream. This is actually happening. Like, it's not just something I'm seeing. I can feel it. So I started praying and asking God for help and, protect me and all this stuff. And this was before I knew anything about casting stuff out in Jesus' name or anything like that. But which I'm sure we'll get into that too. But anyway, so this figure pulls out something that looked like a knife or a dagger or something. I couldn't move, so I couldn't get a real good look at it. But he leaned over and he drove it into my side and pulled it all the way across my stomach, and then pulled it out. And I remember shutting my eyes and waiting for the pain, but the pain never came. And I was positioned in a way where I could kind of look down, and I didn't see any marks or anything on my stomach. It just felt really tingly right there. And this thing, whatever it was, it kind of looked at the dagger or knife or whatever it had. It looked at that, and then it looked at me, and then it was like a wave of anger and hatred. Just like it wasn't anything that I saw, but I felt it. It just like flowed from this thing, like a bomb went off or something, of just anger and hate and evil. And it was angry that whatever it was trying to do was trying to hurt me, and it didn't work. And then it turned around and shuffled out of the room, and then I was able to move again. But I was so scared, I must have passed out or something, because the next thing I remember, it was the next morning, and my door was still open. And I was the first one to wake up in the house. So when my mom and my stepdad woke up, I asked them if just to be sure, I asked them if either of them had opened my door in the middle of the night. They both said no, and they're not going to lie about something like that, And so that was when I realized, okay, there's something more going on here. And the only answer that I could get was, well, it's just demons. Just keep praying. And now I do believe that when I was praying, that God did give me the protection where that thing couldn't hurt me, but I was still having sleep paralysis all the time. And after that happened, when my door was left open, I couldn't adhere to the medical definition of it anymore. It didn't add up. And so I dealt with things like that for a few more years, because, like I said, I was about 12 or 13 at that time. I dealt with that for a few more years. Maybe once or twice a month, I'd have this happen where I would have sleep paralysis, and something would show up and try to attack me. Even to the point of lifting me up and shaking me violently. Things like that. Nothing that ever left any bruises or anything or marks or anything the next day, but still enough that you don't want to deal with it. It's horrifying. So the church wasn't giving me any answers, and by that time, I was by this time I was 17 or 18. I was kind of done with the whole church and Bible thing. I still maintained my belief in Jesus and God, and still maintain that, but I was just kind of done with the whole church thing because, as I said, I thought I knew everything that there was to know, and there weren't, in my opinion, there wasn't any answers about that. So I actually ended up moving in with a friend of mine who was involved in New Age theology, and she considered herself a Wiccan, and I moved in with her and her boyfriend, and I was telling her about these experiences because I said, well, I already know you're kind of spiritual anyway, so I can probably talk to you about this. I don't know what's going on, but I've had this ever since I was a kid. If you let me move in with you, I might bring demons. I don't know. Awkward conversation to have. Just
That's not a good pickup line, bro.
Yeah.
Hey, baby. Oh, by the way.
Yeah, especially right in front of her boyfriend.
I come with hitchhikers.
Yeah, exactly. So I told her all about that. And I said, so if you hear any strange noises at night or something, that's what that is. So just I kind of felt an obligation to at least say something because I didn't know what was going on. So, well, she was like, oh, I know a little bit about that, and I was like, really? And she said, yeah. She said, you're probably being attacked by something spiritual. And I said, well, I figured that out. She said, have you ever heard of astral projection? And I said, no, what's that? And she said, well, some people develop this ability to leave their body. Maybe if you can learn how to do that while you're going through these attacks, you can leave your body and escape them, or maybe, try to defend yourself or something. So she gave me a book. It was like the beginner's guide to astral projection or something like that. And
projection for dummies or what?
Yeah, it was something like that. And I ate that book up. Like I read that book forward and backward like 10, 20 times. Like that was like my Bible at the time. Like I went in head first into this stuff. And I bought into all of it, and I started practicing it. And after about 6 months, I was actually able to. This is kind of crazy stuff, but I was actually able to leave my body for the first time. Now I had realized since then all the. And just to be clear, I am not at all condoning this now, and I'll say why in a moment. But at the time, I fully believed that this was a good thing to do. Now I had realized that there would be no way I would be able to do this while during an attack, because it takes a lot of concentration and meditation and stuff, and there'd just be no way. So it didn't help me there, but that was kind of the hook that got me involved in all this stuff. So I did that for a couple of years. I practiced in astral projection and stuff, and at first it wasn't really anything that spectacular or that sensational. I would leave my body and then the world just looked as it does now. Like there wasn't anything real weird or anything, except that I could go through walls and fly. But besides that, but no, I didn't see any other apparitions or like any other entities or anything for a long time. And all the books that I was reading at the time in this New Age stuff was saying, expect spirit guides and stuff like that. And there was always something that seemed off about that. And it was, my traditional Baptist upbringing was telling me, things like spirit guides, stuff like that, that's kind of iffy. But I figured, well, it's not a problem because I'm not running across them anyway. But, when we, after a couple of years of that, it started real slow. I'd start to see something, like behind a counter or like around a corner or something, and like catch a glimpse of something. But I never tried to interact with anything, and they never tried to interact with me. So, and I didn't, I was going by my feeling at the time. I didn't feel that it was a negative entity or anything. Because that's what New Age tells you to do. They tell you to go by how you feel. So. After a couple of years of that, the entities started showing up more and more and more, and I kind of ignored them. But there was this one time, and this is what kind of showed me that this wasn't a good thing to do. there is this one time that I left my body, I went outside, and I saw just the whole neighborhood was filled with all these entities, and they all looked different. Some looked human, some looked like just like weird monsters. But I didn't get like a negative feeling from any of them. But they were all heading towards this. It looked kind of like a oval, just a big bright light, like an oval portal or something, and they were all heading towards that. And I was really curious what is going on, because that was the first time I ever left my body and saw something like that. So there was a group of them kind of close to me, a group of 7 or 8 of them, and I went up to them, and it didn't feel like anything weird, or it was as if I went to, in my normal waking life, if I just went up to a group of strangers at the store or something and started talking to them, that's how it felt. It didn't feel like weird or sensational or anything like that. So I went up to them and I said, hey, what's going on? And they kind of sidestepped the question, but they were real interested in me. And one of them asked, who I guess was the leader of the group. I don't know. He was really the only one that was talking to me directly. But he was asking me, well, where do you come from? Are you from our side, or are you from from the I don't remember how he worded it, but basically the human world or whatever. And I said, I'm a human, I'm astral projecting right now, so I don't really know how long I have to talk, because timing those things is kind of difficult. But I was just kind of curious what's going on. And then they, once I said that, they all were kind of interested, and they the one that was talking to me said, well, if you ever want help getting out of your body, we know that that's a difficult thing to do. If you ask us when you're trying to get out of your body, we'll help you get out of your body. Oh boy. And so, something I didn't get a negative feeling at all from him, or it was just, there was something in me that was like, okay, there's something wrong about that. And it wasn't coming from any of the feelings that I was taught by New Age theology to trust in, because all of that seemed fine. They seemed polite and cordial and everything. But so I was like, well, I don't know about that. I said, we'll see. I don't know. And they're like, oh, it's fine. No pressure. We don't want to make you uncomfortable. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to go back now. So I went back in my body. And, well, a few days later, I was trying to astral project again. I didn't really give it much thought, but I was trying to astral project again, and I couldn't. And then I remembered what that being said, and I was kind of considering it, but there was something about it that I was like, I really shouldn't do that. And I was praying about it too, because I was still, I still believed in God, and I was still, I still considered myself a Christian, even though I wasn't acting very Christian. But, I still would pray every now and then. I prayed to God, and I said, I really don't know what to do about this, because this doesn't seem right. And so I just decided not to do it, and I didn't ask him for help. And I said, okay, I'm just gonna go to sleep. I'm not gonna mess around with this. Well, right after that, it was pretty much the next day. We started we lived in a trailer at the time. We started having all of my sleep paralysis increased. Instead of being once or twice a month, it was like once or twice a week, sometimes every day. My wife was getting it too. And even more than that, I was starting to see really evil manifestations coming through in my normal waking life, even during the day and stuff. A lot of it was at night, but even some of it was during the day. Now we had a roommate with us who was an atheist, knew nothing about what I was doing, nothing about spirituality. She knew nothing about any of that stuff, and she didn't know what was going on. She came to me one night and she said, I don't know what to do about this, but past couple of nights I've been seeing some really strange stuff. I've been seeing this big ball of light, and every time I see it at night, I get this really angry vibe from it, and then it zooms towards your room at night. And she was paying attention to the time when this would happen, and it was the same time that I was getting these manifestations and things. So I was like, oh man. Well, what I realized that was what had happened. The beings that had asked, that said that, that they would help me. Me not taking them up on their offer, that was like I had crossed them. I had offended them, and they were going to let me know because I went to God with it, and they didn't like that. I didn't recognize them as demons at the time or know what they were, but they were definitely demonic after all the attacks and everything started happening. So I just started praying like crazy. I had no idea what to do about it, and it was around that same time, shortly after, that I just happened upon that episode of It's Supernatural, and that I saw L.A. Marzulli, and started getting more into the Bible. And the more that I got into the Bible, and especially the more I started writing my first book, Disclosure, all of these spiritual things, these attacks would increase. So I took a chance and went out on a limb and emailed LA. That was the first time I ever tried to contact anyone like that, and I didn't really expect to get anything back. But I wrote him an email and told him the situation. I said, I don't know what to do. I'm completely out of my element here. And he wrote. Well, actually, his wife Peggy wrote back the next day and said, LA's on the road, but he wants to talk to you. Here's his number. Give him a call. So I called and had a really good conversation with him. We talked about 20 minutes, and after that, he told me how we can use the name of Jesus if we're saved. We can use the name of Jesus to cast these things out and to close the portals. And he kind of showed me how every time I left my body, I would open a portal to that side, that when I would come back in, the portal stayed open. And we, as Christians, being partakers of Jesus' salvation, we can use his authority to close these portals and actually have authority over these beings. So I started doing that. I did what LA said, and that was when I rededicated my life to Jesus. I was able to get everything out of the house through Jesus' authority. Now at that time, now that I had understood it, and I just used Jesus' name to get the stuff out, close all the portals, and I didn't have any problems with it after that. Every great once in a while, even still, something will slip through just because we live in a fallen world, and that happens from time to time. But when it does, it's not anywhere near what it was. When it does, we just, my wife and I, we just cast it out in the name of Jesus, and it doesn't bother us again. So that's kind of the story of that.
Yeah, wow. We've got a lot in common. I got to ask you. You mentioned did it start right around the time you were about 13 years of age? Yeah.
Well, that was the first real memory that I had about. At the time, it didn't feel like it was a new experience. Like I knew it had happened before, but I for some reason I cannot remember any of them. That was the first time that I actually. Well, that was the first time I had a manifestation. But I knew that I had sleep paralysis before that, but I couldn't really remember it for some reason. That goes into a whole other thing. But
do you have a sister?
No, I don't. I was the only child.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've had similar experiences myself, and I know other people, and it seems to be about that age. It's like right about the time we reach puberty that something happens, and depending on whatever open doors you may have had, either generational or through acts of your own, that seems to be, at least from my own personal experience as well as experience of others that I know who have had similar stories, they always point to right around that time, 12, 13, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Wow.
Crazy stuff.
To say the least.
Well, that's a good setup, I think, for the second hour. Because we're getting ready to go to the break here in a few minutes, or about a minute or so. When we come back from the break, though, I want to talk about your book, Quantum Creation.
Yeah.
Does this supernatural lurk in the fourth dimension? And you kind of set that up quite well with this last section there, because you were talking about all sorts of things like portals.
Yeah.
And opening and closing portals and stuff like that, and dealing with the supernatural. So, yeah. So we'll get ready to go to break here, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Josh Peck about his new book, Quantum Creation. We'll see you back here in about 3 minutes.
You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project here on Truth Frequency Radio Network. I am your host, Rob Skiba. And before the break, we were talking with Josh Peck about, all kinds of stuff. Shadow people, paranormal experiences, astral projections, spiritual attacks, portals, all kinds of stuff like that. I do want to spend the next hour talking about your book, but I just want to give you an opportunity to close out that talk if you had anything else you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing that I learned through all of that is one of the main questions that I had while I was going through that is, why is God allowing this to happen to me? Because I did believe in God, and I believed in the biblical God, but I just couldn't understand why God was allowing that, like those types of attacks and all these horrible things. Like at that time, I've never seen like a good angel or anything. It was always demonic stuff. And I wondered for a long time and why God was allowing that to happen to me. And it wasn't until I prayed and kind of rededicated my life to Jesus that I realized there is an answer. And I that was one of my biggest questions to God was why did all that happen to me? I can see it now, because if it wasn't for all of that stuff, I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I would have, if I had a ministry at all, I would have a totally different ministry. But I wouldn't be able to help people that are going through some of the same things, because I've had people contact me saying that they're dealing with similar things, or that they are actively involved in astral projection and they want more information about it, or they want they feel they can't go to like a church because they're going to be judged about it. And so I'll get emails and stuff like that, and I've been able to help people through that, and I see it now. And I'll say to anybody that's listening, if you're involved in this stuff, or if you're dealing with similar things, or even things that aren't similar to that, but you want a fresh perspective on it, or somebody at least to talk to that isn't going to judge you or tell you that you're going to burn in hell for all of eternity. If you can contact me. I'm very open to talking about this stuff on a one-on-one basis. My email is joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com, and I'm also really active on Facebook, probably more active than I should be, but you can get a hold of me on there, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it and share more of my experiences. And I always stay open to that. So I can see now there was a reason that God kind of led me through the wilderness, as we would say. Now, it was still my own free will to kind of fall away from him and start dabbling in other things. And, I had to I had to, in a sense, clean up my own mess. But God, once I rededicated myself, God was like, well, here, I'll help you. And it was through his love and mercy and grace on me that I was ever able to get any kind of control over it. And just because of his authority. So I think that'd probably be a good thing to end on with that that topic is that there is a reason.
Yeah, there is. And if there's anybody out there struggling with this stuff, I mean, sometimes it comes down to us generationally. That there are things that our parents or their parents, or sometimes as far out as 3 and 4 generations. It talks about in the Bible that the sins of the fathers are passed down to the 3rd and 4th generation. So sometimes we end up, unfortunately, inheriting some of this stuff, just like we inherit other traits from our forefathers. But other times we open those doorways, those pathways, those portals ourselves through some sort of what the Bible calls sin. Doing things that we should not be doing opens up doorways and invites these things in to attack us and assault us and whatnot. But in either case, whether it's a generational case or whether it's something that you willingly got into through your own choices, you can get victory in it, as Josh said. You can get forgiveness and healing, and I do believe that when we find healing, that we are healed to be a healer, that we are blessed to be a blessing. The things that we go through in life enable us to, especially when we get victory in it, those things enable us to be a resource to help other people who are going through the same thing. Because, you know, your experiences, the experiences that Josh is talking about, he's going to be able to relate to you. If you're having those kind of experiences, he's going to relate to you. I can relate to you. I've had similar experiences myself. And I would extend the invitation also to anybody that wants to contact me as well. Josh, what is your website?
It is www.ministudyministry.com. I have all sorts of stuff on there. All of my contact information is on there as well. I also have my own show called The Sharpening, and in that show I do deal a lot with supernatural things as well. We even did a whole show on sleep paralysis with Chris White, and that was an amazing episode. There's information on my website there, but you can also go to my YouTube channel, which I have every episode, including the one with Rob Skiba. It is youtube.com/Josh Peck Disclosure. So all that can be found there too.
Excellent. All right, so let's get into your new book. It's called Quantum Creation: Does the Supernatural Lurk in the Fourth Dimension? I think we've kind of already addressed some of that, certainly, but in addition to what you've just described already, what would you say led you to the writing of that book in the first place?
Well, while I was being raised in the Baptist mindset, I was always interested in science. You know, I was kind of a nerdy kid, and I wear that badge proudly now. But
hey, nerds ruling the world right now.
That's right, absolutely, yeah. And I was always like, for example, Donatello was always my favorite Ninja Turtle. You know, I was that kid.
Nice.
And so I always had a real interest in science and like an appreciation for it, but it didn't always mesh well with my faith. And really, you know, what I would say now is it didn't mesh well with religion, because a lot of what didn't mesh was man-made traditions that aren't even biblical. But so what led me to write the book is I still had this all throughout my life. I had this really deep appreciation and interest in science, but especially in quantum physics. It was something that just seemed so strange and unusual. I like mysteries and things like that. So, I really fell in love with that. But I always kind of pushed that to the side because I was a Christian, and we got to put our faith above all else, and science seemed to conflict with religion and all that. So I always kind of pushed that to the side. But it was actually my wife that kind of reintroduced me to the world of quantum physics, and I'm really thankful that she did. When she was growing up, she wanted to be an astronaut. And this isn't just like a dream of a little kid. Like she was actually making plans to study for this and everything. But when she was in middle school, she was in a terrible car accident and got hit by a drunk driver, and she had a closed head injury. So she found out due to that she would never be able to go up in space. But she always maintained the interest, and kind of in her own private time, like studied stuff like that. So that was one of the things I loved about her, right off the bat when I met her, that she, had this really scientific mind, but she was also really Christian too. Cause I was like, well, there's somebody that's been able to marry the two and, isn't having any issues with it. So she kind of, reignited my passion for quantum physics, cause we just through talking and everything. So we would, we would watch documentaries on Discovery Channel and, things like that about all this stuff. And, over time, I started to realize that it's not really the science itself that conflicts with the Bible. It's the interpretations that are attached to science that conflicts with the Bible, because a lot of times you'll hear a physicist that'll they'll have an observation of some sort, whether it's through mathematics or a direct observation or something, and then they'll say, well, this shows that we are our own gods and we create our own reality and stuff like that. They'll look at things like the double slit experiment, which in a nutshell kind of shows how just merely observing an experiment can alter it. Some physicists, and not all of them, but some of them will look at that and say, well, see, we create our own reality around us, and they put that interpretation on it. But the interpretation, that's really just the physicist's idea. That's not the direct. That's not something that's directly being observed, or that's not the science itself. And I started to realize that we kind of tend to do that in Christianity as well. We'll take a Bible verse and we'll think that it means something, and we'll apply our own interpretations to it. I'm guilty of this. I've done this so many times I've lost count. But where I think that the Bible will be saying one thing, and then a new revelation will come up, or another Bible verse, or another way of looking at it that makes more sense, and I'll realize, oh, it's not saying that at all. I was just adding my own ideas into it. So religion does that as well. Science and religion both do that. So when I started to realize, when we have the proper interpretation of science and the proper interpretation of the Bible, they go hand in hand and they complement each other perfectly. But in saying that, we also have to have a litmus test, or like a proof text. We have to have something that we can compare things against, and to that I go to the Bible every time. That's why I say we have to watch what our interpretation of the Bible is saying, but the Bible itself does contain 100% truth. And as I said at the top of the show, the reason that I wholeheartedly believe that is because of all the fulfilled prophecy. That's 100% accurate. So, if there's any text in the world that has that type of accuracy, it's the Bible. So that's our proof text that we can go to. But again, it comes down to observation versus interpretation. So once I realized that there was that aspect of it, I started to see, well, that's what the dichotomy between religion and science is. It's not religion by itself or science by itself. It's the interpretations of both. And those are the things that don't match, because in reality, if we're going to believe that there is an all-powerful God and a creator of the universe that put all this stuff in place and put us here and did all these amazing things and is the reason that anything even exists, then science, which is just really the observation of that creation in different forms, should line right up with that. So even in things like quantum physics, where there's so much mystery and so much unknown, and there's so much in there that physicists will say points to something else outside of God. So that's what really kind of really spurred me on to write this book, because I realized that there is actually quantum physics in the Bible, and it blew my mind, and I was like, oh, I got to write this down. And so the main thing that I had to get across right away in the book was the difference between interpretation and observation, so that we can actually try our best to look at this stuff objectively. Now, of course, we're still human. We perceive things in our own way. We're still gonna. There's no such thing as 100% objectivity, because we're human. But we should at least try to get there, as close as we can. But that's also why we have the Bible, which we can look for as our source of our ultimate truth. So. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's what led me to write the book.
Have you ever seen the documentary "What the Bleep Do We Know"?
Yes. Yeah, and I referenced it in my book because okay, that was one of actually it was on the last time I was on your show was while I was still writing the book and getting everything together for the book, and we were talking a little bit about the book and everything, and you had mentioned that, and at the time I hadn't seen it. So after the show, I thought, well, I should check that out. So I checked it out, and I'm really glad that you told me about it, because wow, that's one of the most Gnostic things I've ever seen. But they advertise. It's a bit older now. I think it was 2002 or something. But at the time they were promoting it as like a scientific documentary, and that even still, if you go to try to rent it or go to watch it, that's how it's promoted. And one of the first things that I noticed was there was a lot of talk about interpretation, but not a lot of talk. Maybe 10% of it, and I'm even being generous there, was actually scientific stuff. They had a couple of things that were scientific. They talked about how electrons repel each other, and that's what physical matter, stuff like that. But most of it was just interpretation. What I thought was real funny watching that is while I was watching it, I realized when they would have a person talking, they didn't have like the person's name or profession that was talking. Usually in any other documentary I've ever seen, when they cut to a scene of a person talking, they'll put their name and profession right underneath it. And, they want to do that because they want to show in their documentary, this is somebody that you can rely on, that, this is his area of expertise, it's reputable. And they didn't do that at all in the documentary. It wasn't until the very end, actually, I think it might have even been after the credits, but it was the very end of the documentary that they finally showed who these people were that had been talking for 2 or 3 hours, and their profession. Most of them were just like most. There maybe one or two physicists. Like most of them were like New Age theologists or like other theologians or like yoga instructor. Just like weird stuff like that. And there wasn't. It was people that were talking about scientific things that weren't necessarily that wasn't their profession. And somebody could easily turn around and say, "Well, Josh, you're talking about scientific things, and you're not a scientist." And okay, well, that's true. I'm not, but I'm also not trying to present myself as if I am. I say right in the very first, actually, I think in the introduction that I'm not a scientist at all. I'm a Christian. I'm a Bible researcher. That's what I enjoy doing, but I'm not a scientist. I enjoy this study, and it's a hobby of mine. And these are some of the conclusions that I've come to on how science can integrate into the Bible. So that's what I would have to say to anybody that would say that. I'm not trying to trick you into thinking that I am a physicist, because I'm definitely not. But so a very long answer for a very simple question. Yes, I have seen that documentary.
Well, because it does deal with a lot of wild stuff, and some of which is scientific, and you can certainly verify it. And I'm trying to think. I think it was in. I'm pretty sure that it was in that documentary that I saw the what's the guy's Dr. Emoto, I think is his name, the Japanese guy that had figured out how frequencies and things affect water.
Yeah, that was the one. Yep.
Was it in that movie? I can't remember.
Yeah,
that blew me away. And I actually had a friend of mine contact me, and we went out to eat. He and his wife and Sheila and I went out, and he was asking about if I knew about that. I'm like, yeah, I saw that documentary, and I've seen some other stuff on YouTube about that guy and his work. He said, we tried the rice experiment. I said, really? He said, the rice experiment is basically they cooked up some rice and they ate it, but they had leftovers, and so they got two like glass Tupperware type things, that you can seal it up in,
right?
And they put the same amount of rice from the same batch that they had made into two glass containers, and they spoke positive things over one of them. I love you, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, whatever. And I think they might have even taped something on it, like, thank you or whatever to it. And the other one, they were swearing at it and calling it names and, just being really, angry toward it, and put some hateful stuff on it. And then they put it away in a shelf. And he said, then we forgot about it. And he said, several months went by. I forget how long, let's say 6 months or whatever. And they were looking for something else, and they ended up finding it, both of those in there again. And he said, Rob, I got to tell you, he says, the one that we spoke the positive stuff over, looked like you could still eat it. The other one was all black and moldy and, all nasty. And both were sealed in the same type of container made from the same batch.
Yep.
And, when we think about it, the idea that our body is, so much of who we are is made up of water. I mean, that just makes me think. And I just posted something on my Facebook not too long ago, just this past week, I think, about how frequencies affected that. They were pouring like salt on this metal plate, and they were piping frequencies or something, either into it or over it, but it was changing the shape. Like, I was making like almost like crop circle like formations, depending on the frequency.
I saw that post. I actually shared it on mine when I saw your
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bible tells us that God spoke the universe into existence.
Yep.
So everything is vibration, everything is frequency, and that there is power in our words if we are created in His, not just His image, but His likeness.
Yep.
Then even the Bible says the power of life and death is in the tongue.
Exactly.
So how much of that is in your book, and care to comment on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's a perfect example of the difference between observation and interpretation. Because the observation can be made that yes, we do affect the reality around us in certain ways, and the rice thing is a perfect example of that. But it's an interpretation to go from that and say we create the reality around us. To me, that's like a far leap. I don't see rice appearing out of nowhere because somebody says thank you, or
Well, the word of faith movement takes that to a crazy extreme too, because they live in fear.
Yeah.
Oh, you're cursing yourself, or I mean, I do believe that our words have power, but I believe that the intent has to be behind it.
Absolutely.
And, some people freak out because you say something. It's like, look, I didn't mean it that way. Well, you shouldn't say stuff. I'm like, look, it's not that powerful. And if they fight with me, my trump card in that argument is, there's $1 billion in my closet. And I go in there, and son of a gun, there's not $1 billion in there. And I had more intent of wanting that than anything else I might have said.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I do deal with that in the book to show that quantum physics, quantum theory does actually show, and we can see through observation that we do affect the reality around us, at least in minor ways. Now, when we have the power of God on our side, it can be in major ways, but it's still it's still in accordance to God's will. We can't expect to take matters into our own hands. When we think when I was in New Age theology, I thought that I had all this power, that I was able to do all this stuff, but it wasn't really me doing it. It was at that time, you're on one side or another. It was the enemy making me think that, so we can affect our reality in at least on a quantum level. Sure, I have no issue with that. And when we have the authority of God on our side, and if it's in accordance to His will, we can do amazing things. I mean, Jesus Himself even said that these things you will do, and even greater works. Or I'm paraphrasing there, but I mean, and look at everything He did. He walked on water, and He healed people, and He said that we could even do greater works than that. That's amazing. But again, with stuff that drastic, it's all in accordance to God's will, and it's still really, it's God. It's not our power doing it. We're not our own gods. That's not what. When I look at quantum physics, that's not my interpretation of it at all. And I don't think the observations state that either. If anything, all of that stuff points back to God. I mean, even string theory itself, how you said that everything was spoken into existence, that actually lines up with string theory. I don't know where we are in the questioning, but if you want, I could go into that.
We got about 2 minutes before the break, so
I'll need more time than that.
Go ahead and do a teaser, and then I'll turn the last half hour over to you. I'll just shut up and let you go.
All right. Well, yeah. So like I was string theory. Well, I'll say this as a teaser: string theory and everything in quantum physics. It's not that complicated to understand the basics of it, and that was one of the biggest things that made me shy away from this stuff to begin with. Was that I thought there's no way I'm smart enough to be able to get this stuff. Well, in reality, nobody's smart enough to really get it, but the basics of it, the stuff that's being put out there, it's not beyond, for those listening, it's not beyond your comprehension. It's stuff that you can get. And I wrote this book in a really easy to understand way. I mean, if I can understand it, anybody can. So string theory, don't be afraid about that. I'll explain what that means. It's a pretty simple concept. I believe it to be an accurate definition of reality, and I believe that it goes right in line with a lot of passages in the Bible, but one in particular that after the break I'll get into. And if you haven't heard this before, your mind will be blown, as mine was when I first saw this. So there you go. There's a teaser for you.
Okay. Well, and as part of that teaser, would you say, how does faith play a role in quantum physics?
Well, I think I think faith.
What I'm asking is where Jesus said, well, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to that mountain, move, and it's going to move. And he said that after he had basically cursed the fig tree. He says, no more fruit's going to come from you. And they walk by the next day, and Peter's like, hey, look at the fig tree you cursed yesterday. I mean, it's withered, from the roots up or whatever.
Well, I'll say this: if somebody who like a non-believer who does not have access to God's authority is able to control things and affect things on a quantum level, imagine how much somebody could do with the power of an infinitely powerful God on their side.
Right on. All right. Well, when we get back, you'll have the whole second half of the last part of the show to go to town.
Sounds good.
Live from Dublin, Ireland.
The Earth Needs Rebels Show with Kev Bull. Monday through Friday on Truth Frequency Radio.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project here on Truth Frequency Radio Network. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and before the break, we were talking with Josh Peck about his new book, Quantum Creation, Does the Supernatural Lurk in the Fourth Dimension? Josh, where can people get your book?
The best place to get it is on my website, ministudyministry.com. It's right there on the homepage. You can't miss it. And and now it's available for all ebook formats as well. So that'd be the best place to get it. And I'd ask too if you it's also available on Amazon. But if you happen to pick up the book, if you'd write me a review, that'd be great. Just an honest review. It doesn't have to be glowing or anything, but.
Right on. All right. Before the break, I asked you a question about faith and how it plays a role in quantum physics. Do you believe that fear and faith are the same thing?
Well, like you, like you mentioned, I see them as like two ends of a spectrum, kind of like a opposite, maybe. Well, I don't know if equal would be the right word because I think faith is far more powerful than fear. But you mentioned during the break we had a little chat, and you mentioned that it's like two sides of the same coin, and I can definitely agree with that. When the Word of Faith movement is a good example to use. When we look at the reasoning behind things like that, it is based out of fear. That's why people want to control their own paths and stuff like that. On the surface, that doesn't seem like it would be a bad thing to have control over your own destiny and over things that come into your life. And in some regards, it's fine. Like I wake up and choose what I want to wear that day, whatever. But when it gets to the point where we feel like we have to control it so much that we're willing to go to such lengths, then it becomes a fear type of thing when it's done on our own without God. The way that I look at it now, being a man of faith, I don't want. I'm past the point where I want control over my own life in those regards, because I feel that to a certain extent I had it at one point, and I made a mess of it. It was a wreck. I didn't know what I was doing, and because we're operating in dimensions that we have no concept of. We have no, and especially when I was in New Age theology, it was all based on feelings, and you'd read one book that said one thing and then another book that said something completely different. So there was no real proof text for anything. Now where faith differs is it's like, okay, well, I know I'm not equipped to deal with this. I've tried it. And this is me speaking personally. I've tried it. It messed up my life. It wasn't good. The Bible says there's God who actually wants to help me out, and if I put my faith in Him, He'll guide me through that and give Him control and trust in Him to lead me throughout my life. And ever since I've made that decision to do that, I can't even, the fear's gone, like that type of fear that I had where I needed to control everything. The fear's gone, because now somebody infinitely more powerful than myself is taking care of it, who actually wants to take care of it. And trusting in Him implicitly, it creates this way of living that it reduces stress. You don't have to worry about it. I mean, we're still humans, so we still worry about things, but you don't necessarily it's liberating. I think that's a good word for it. It's liberating to give up control to someone more equipped to deal with it than ourselves. And once I did that, there's just no comparison. My life with God is so much more fulfilling and better and more in control than my life when I tried to control everything myself. Mm-hmm. So moving from the end of the spectrum from fear to faith was, for me, that's the way to go.
Yeah, right on. Well, we got about 21 minutes left, and your book, just the title alone, Supernatural Lurking in the Fourth Dimension, we can go in any million directions, from Gnosticism to UFO, string theory of fourth dimension. You choose, and you got the next 20 minutes, bro. Just go to town.
All right. Well, I promised the string theory thing, so I'll go into that. And I'll say in my book too, I do deal with what the fourth dimension is, and because most people would say that it's time, and yes, it's time, but there's also a fourth dimension of space that I believe is that is actually the spirit world. I get into all that in the book, so we get into dimensions, a lot of other stuff that we don't have time to get into on this show. But I did promise the string theory thing, and this blew my mind, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's so phenomenal. So when I started looking into string theory, because it's a staple of quantum physics, and as I said before the break, it was something that I kind of shied away from at first because I thought that I wouldn't be able to understand it, but I realize that that's not true. It's actually pretty simple, but I had to ask myself, could it be possible that modern string theory actually agrees with ancient biblical principles? And so excuse me. So in trying to find connections between quantum physics and biblical teachings concerning reality as we know it, I was brought to an interesting verse, and really there's a lot of verses like this, but Hebrews 11:3 is what really stuck out for me, which says, this is the King James version, and I'll go into the ESV too because it's a lot easier to understand. But the King James, if I can get through it, because King James is kind of hard to quote sometimes. But it says, Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. So first, to understand what's being discussed, the word worlds there was translated from the Greek word aeon, and which can have a lot of different meanings. Forever, an unbroken age, perpetuity of time, eternity, the worlds, universe, period of time, and age. Now, this verse is talking about God's creation, so I actually think it's reasonable that all of those definitions are acceptable. So that's what's talked about there. Now, the term "Word of God" is used many times throughout the Old and New Testament of the Bible in reference to different things. And as I show in Quantum Creation, there are times that the Word of God, that term "Word of God" is in direct reference to Jesus himself, such as in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, which is in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's one of the uses. That's in or even in a sense, sometimes in the Old Testament, that term, the word, is used as like a type of you could think of it as a pre-incarnate Jesus in the Old Testament, and I deal with a whole chapter on just that. But there's much more that could be explored there. But for our purposes here, in Hebrews 11:3, it's actually a different Greek word than what's used in John chapter 1 for word. In Hebrews 11:3, the Greek word for word is rhema, meaning that which is or has been uttered by the living voice, things spoken, word, subject matter of speech, things spoken of. But in John 1:1, where it says the word, word comes from the Greek logos, which, as I explained in Quantum Creation, has deeper implications than just a spoken word or voice. But Hebrews 11:3 is referring to the literal voice of God. It's saying that everything in existence was created by the literal spoken word of God. So now that's the first half of the verse. We can begin to look at the second half, but first, it would be of great value to go over the basic idea of string theory, so we can see if it applies here. String theory conveys the idea that every particle of matter is actually the result of even smaller strings that vibrate. And I actually have a quote in my book here that I can read to quote Quantum Creation. In essence, if you look deeply enough into any subatomic particle, you will find a string. Even more, string theory states that the strings within different particles are actually identical in nature, but vibrate at different rates and in different patterns. The vibrations of the string is what determines what type of particle it is to be. For example, an electron is less massive than a quark. So according to string theory, the electron's string vibrates less than the quark's string. So, in other words, the vibrations of the string is what produces the particle. A particle is nothing more than the result of those vibrations. Now, as of today, it's not known what exactly causes the strings to vibrate, in the scientific community. But what they pretty much will all agree on is that whatever it is, it must come from a higher dimension. Now, that brings us to the last half of Hebrews 11:3. Now, in the King James, it says, things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. But I think the ESV actually, it's a little easier to understand. So the whole Hebrews 11:3 verse in the ESV says, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So we can notice specifically that the text reads, what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So that's to say everything in physical existence, or what can be seen, was made by something invisible, or something outside of what we can perceive from our three spatial dimensional perspective. Now, if string theory is an accurate definition of reality, and I do believe that it is, this could help explain what exactly causes the strings to vibrate. Now, when talking about this, we got to keep in mind that even time itself is a creation of God. That's important because it shows that God himself is actually outside of time by nature. Now, of course, he can inject himself into time as he sees fit, but that doesn't mean that he's bound by time like you and I are. God is, by his very own nature, he's outside of time itself. Now, the reason that that's important to realize goes back to the cause of the strings' vibrations. Hebrews 11 tells us that everything was created by the spoken word of God. So, in essence, God spoke everything into existence. Now, from our perspective, since we're bound by time, that initial creative act would have occurred in the past from our perspective. That's why the past tense language is used in that verse. However, God being outside of time, it means that there is no real past or present or future as we know it from his perspective. And that also helps bring into clear focus things like Isaiah 46:10, which says that God can call out the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end. And that also explains why prophecy is so accurate. But for God, everything just is. Everything is known and seen just as clearly as everything else, regardless of where it falls on the timeline of physical existence. So the ultimate conclusion to all this, and the truly amazing thing that can be considered if we put all of this together, is that we exist within the spoken word of God. It's not just a thing that happened in the past and we're the result of that thing that happened in the past. From our perspective, that initial creative word from God is still forever emanating from him from outside of time itself. So it's his eternal voice that is causing strings to vibrate, thereby resulting in the production of the physical particles that make up all of matter and energy. So we're not only created by God, our existence is maintained by God through his voice. So as you're listening to this, you could look at your hand. The only reason that your hand is there right now is because it's existing, because the voice of God is currently making it possible from outside of time itself. You yourself are a direct result of the timeless, ongoing, and never-ending spoken word of God himself. It's still going on. That's what's holding everything together. And that to me was it's not the most profound thing that I've discovered in writing this book, but it's up there. That blew my mind. That, because I always looked at creation as a past event. But if we're talking about a God that is outside of time, then it wouldn't, from his perspective, it would still be going on. He's still doing it, and the result of that is we're here. You're a direct result of God's voice. You're a manifestation of his voice right now. Like that, not enough could be said about that to really be able to wrap our heads around that. But that, I don't know, that just blows my mind. So that's one example of how something in quantum physics like string theory is actually a biblical principle and can be supported with the Bible. But yeah.
So, what about, I get what you're saying. He's outside of time, and everything is held together by his spoken word. But yet he rested on the seventh day. Mm-hmm. So, how does that play into that theory?
Well, when we're talking about there, that's the idea of God. When I said earlier how he can inject himself into time as he sees fit, that was when time existed. He put himself into time and he started doing things, and creating the even the garden. I mean, there's even a whole separate creation account just for the garden. Some people will say, I forget the exact verses, but that the creation account seems to differ. But it's
chapter 2 verses 1, chapter 1.
Yeah. It's not a different telling of the same thing. It's one's talking about the world and the other's talking about the garden itself. But so it factors in because that shows how God can operate within time as well. He's not bound by time like we are, but he's also not excluded from it. He can operate in it as much as he wishes. So from our perspective, for us to even be able to understand it, when he injected himself into time to be able to create all the things that's in that creation account, it gives us kind of like a frame of reference to realize that God is all powerful in both instances, outside of time and within time. Now, I do believe that when God, Hebrews 11 here, I think that's when he's talking about God's initial act of creation. When that first spoken word at that instant, I mean, there wasn't time, but at that instant, all the particles existed and everything, the building blocks were there, you could say. And then when we read the creation account for the first week, he's using those things to be able to create. They're like, man, we were created from the dust of the earth on the sixth day. So, he's using those things within the timeline to be able to create things in physical reality in a timeline that we actually live in now. So it really is a lot to get our heads around, and the Bible says too, his ways are above our ways and his thoughts higher than our thoughts. So we can't really expect to fully grasp it, but just the basics of it, or just the implications of it, and realizing what that means, it's just wow.
Come on, man, you got 7 minutes. You gotta like wrap up all the mysteries of the universe.
You picked the wrong guy.
All right. Well, I want to know your thoughts on the fourth dimension. I know that a lot of times people talk about it in terms of time, but I agree with you that there is an unseen realm that is like right around us right now.
Yeah.
And you think that is a fourth dimension, or is it a fifth?
Yeah. Well, it might be as many as 12, which I get into in the book. But the easiest, I'll try to do this as fast as I can. The easiest way, we're not able to understand a spatial dimension above our own because we live in 3 spatial dimensions. Now, when people say that time is the fourth dimension, they are right, but they're talking about a temporal dimension. Spatial dimension is something different. We have like the X, Y, and Z axis. That we learned in middle school geometry. Those are the dimensions that we live in. The best way to try to explain a 4-dimensional area of space would be to use a lower dimension by analogy. So the best example I've ever heard, and a lot of physicists use it, was a book called Flatland that was written something like 100 years ago or something. And it tells the story of this race of these beings called Flatlanders, who are 2-dimensional in nature, meaning they only exist within the X and Y axis. They don't have an up or down. That's why it's called Flatland. So you can imagine something like that on your tabletop. So imagine that there's a universe like that exists where now how would we as 3-dimensional beings be able to explain ourselves or be able to communicate or show ourselves to a 2-dimensional being? Like if we stuck our finger through Flatland, what would that look like to them? They wouldn't be able to see our whole finger. What they would see is like a point just appear out of nowhere and then grow into a line, from their perspective, because if they're looking straight at it, it would be a line, grow into a line as our finger passes through. And as we pull our finger out, they would just see the line shrink and disappear. So from the Flatlanders' perspective, technically they saw our finger, but they were only able to see it in these 2-dimensional slices as our finger passes through. The same idea goes with the fourth dimension. What if a 4-dimensional object, like let's say a hypersphere, which is a sphere that has 4 spatial dimensions instead of 3? What if something like that were to breach our 3 dimensions of space? What would that look like? We would see a point in space just appear out of nowhere, and then it would, it would grow in size. The sphere would grow as the hypersphere itself is moving through our dimension, but to us it would look stationary. It would grow in size, and as it moved out, it would shrink in size and then just disappear. Now, what's really interesting is people report that with things like orbs and even UFOs that seem to have these extra dimensional capabilities that do things like that. They change and morph and change colors and all the, they connect into one and do all these weird things. So I dedicate a whole chapter on just that, about the UFO thing. But that's one of the best ways to try to understand a fourth spatial dimension is using lower dimension by analogy. And Flatland, I go into a lot of other examples of this in the book, but I know we don't have a whole ton of time, so I can't really get into them.
You got 3 minutes. Talk
3 minutes. All right, so that's the easiest. That's the easiest way to really be able to understand it is try to think of 2 dimensions and how we would explain ourselves. Now, imagine if there are 4-dimensional beings, like actual entities that exist in the 4th dimension. How would they look to us if they were to breach through? We would see them as a 3-dimensional slice of their 4-dimensional nature. And I believe that's why it says, in the Bible that angels are actually solid. They actually have physicality. I don't believe we're seeing the whole thing. They're extra dimensional. Even Jesus himself, after he was resurrected and after he had his new body, he was actually able to show that he had access to the higher dimensions because he disappeared out of a room that was closed. He didn't leave through the door or anything. He was just gone. Now imagine, like in Flatland, if there was a Flatlander inside of like a Flatland house or something. To a Flatlander, it would only need 4 walls. There's no up or down, so it doesn't need a ceiling or floor. 4 walls, and then he's trapped in there. Now, what we could do is we could pull the Flatlander out into our dimension, into the 3rd dimension, move him over slightly, and put him outside of the house. To other Flatlanders, it would look like he just disappeared out of the house and reappeared outside of it because they can't see the 3rd dimension. But really, he's just manipulating the 3rd dimension. I think that's the same type of thing. With at the very least with the 4th dimension, but probably even higher dimensions than that. I believe there's as many as 12, which that has biblical significance too, just the number 12, which I do get into in the book there. Oh man, there's so many directions I could take.
Yeah, we'll have to do another show just on that because I'm fascinated by that whole idea, and I've heard that there could be even more dimensions even than that. But from a biblical worldview, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about the 12. So we'll have to do that probably on another show. But
anytime.
Yeah. So why don't you give some more of your contact information, your website, and any other books or anything else you'd like to let the listeners know about?
Sure, absolutely. My website, again, is ministudyministry.com. We talked a lot about things in the first part of the show that are included in my book, Disclosure, Unveiling Our Role in the Secret War of the Ancients. And now that's updated and expanded, so it's a good time to get that one. That's on the website. You just go to ministudyministry.com and go to the link paperback books, or if you want the ebook's available too. Quantum Creation is there on ministudyministry.com. It's right on the homepage. You can't miss it. If you're interested in my show, I actually did a 4-hour episode just on the book, and which I didn't intend to do that, but it ended up going 4 hours long, and even in that, I barely scratched the surface of what's in the book. But the show is called The Sharpening, and I'm the host. Information on that is available on my website. All past episodes are on, as well as a lot of different things, are on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Josh Peck Disclosure. If you have any questions or comments or anything at all, email me, joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com, or get a hold of me on Facebook.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Great show, man.
Well, thank you.